Hey everyone, welcome to the 386th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a lot to talk about this week. I can't believe it. We are going to be running down the acquisition of FreedomPhi by Nova Labs, the maker of the Helium network. We've got some bad news on the security front on the OT side based on a new report from Clarity. We've also got a new vulnerability that can threaten air-gapped systems, even though we all know there's no such thing as air-gapped systems. Amazon has patched their Ring cameras that had a surprising vulnerability. And we've got a startup that is, I love it. We're going to talk about it. It's very exciting, using AR to disclose privacy issues. We've also got a new wearable device to talk about, an upcoming chip from Nordic that offers Wi-Fi for the first time ever. And despite a new wearable, Kevin is not stoked about all the devices coming out, and he'll tell you why. We're also going to be discussing a few little news bits from Nordic Semiconductor, InfluxDB, and Chamberlain. Plus, our guest this week is Josh Corman, and he is actually now at Clarity. He used to be at CISA, and before that, he created I Am the Cavalry. We're going to be talking about how to get your stuff off search and some just bare minimum security practices we should all be abiding by. This goes for smart home, small to medium-sized business owners, and even big companies. We'll also hear from our sponsor, Silicon Labs, discussing their Works With event coming up in September. But before we get to all of this, let's hear from another one of our sponsors, Impinj. Y'all, take what you know about the IoT and expand it by a factor of 1,000. That is what our sponsor for this episode, Impinj, is doing. With the Impinj platform, everything can be connected, from strawberries to supply chains, from rail cars to raw materials. Impinj is creating the internet of every little thing. So, to learn more, go to go.impinj.com/Stacey. That's Impinj with a J, IMPINJ.com/Stacey. Okay, Kevin, we'll just get right into it. Everyone loves when we talk about helium and cryptocurrencies because everyone is just, y'all are crazy.
It's very polarizing. Did you know that? Did you notice that?
So polarizing.
Yeah.
All right. So before we talk about this, I have to tell you, both Kevin and I run helium hotspots. Not for the money necessarily, just because we're like crazy people who want to support the IoT. All right. So Nova Labs, the company behind the Helium network. And the Helium network is a low-power, long-range IoT network that uses LoRa. And they basically sit on people's Wi-Fi. They have hotspots that live in people's homes using their Wi-Fi to basically pick up and transfer LoRa packets. That's what they have done. Now, they have moved to doing 5G, and their 5G partner, last year they signed a deal with FreedomPhi to create this 5G network. And the 5G network is using the CBRS spectrum. And if you're like, what is happening? The CBRS spectrum is this radio spectrum the FCC auctioned off. And basically, if you have it, you can use it to create private networks. So some companies like John Deere actually is doing a private CBRS network, a private 5G network in their factory. Some universities have it, but also some mobile carriers have bought CBRS spectrum. And they are running 5G networks over it. So Nova Labs purchased FreedomPhi. It's about a year after they did that deal. The terms of the deal are undisclosed. And with this, Nova Labs, the company behind Helium, is going to get further into offering a 5G network that operates in the same decentralized fashion that the Helium network does. And they incentivize people to use the Helium or to support and share their internet access on the Helium network. By providing coverage, I am getting a fraction of what they call a Helium network token, an H&T. My H&Ts can convert into dollars if I want them to. Mm-hmm. And I have made a lot of money. I'm making much less money now with the crypto crash and just a lowering in terms of like now to make more money on the network, I have to be transferring data credits. But right now my hotspot is not transferring data credits. So I'm making much less because I'm just like, yeah, I'm here. I'm still providing coverage.
And I've actually transferred 4, maybe 5 data credits in the 3-ish months that I've had my hotspot running. And those are data credits from IoT
data
devices. Data packets. That's correct. From LoRaWAN devices
that hop onto your network.
Yeah. And then I provide the internet connection through my home network to wherever that data needs to go. There's a key difference here, and I can't be the only one. Please tell me I'm not the only one that didn't understand. I knew about Helium's 5G plans. I just didn't understand them. I thought, why are they building this 5G network for IoT devices? They're not. If you use this network, you'll use it on your smartphone, your cellular tablet, or whatever. So it'll be like little pockets of 5G that piggybacks off people's home internet, essentially, to watch videos or get email or whatever. So like, think of it like, as you said, a decentralized 5G network, similar to what, say, a cellular company would do at a nationwide level. Helium is trying to do in this distributed fashion, just like it did with the LoRaWAN hotspots.
Yes. And in May, they created a separate financial incentive scheme for the 5G network. They're called mobile tokens. If you are operating a 5G hotspot, you are going to get mobile tokens. There's a bunch to say here. All right, big picture, the gear is more expensive because 5G gear is more expensive. So instead of like $400 for a LoRaWAN hotspot, you're going to be paying like, it can range from $1,500 to $5,000 depending on...
$1,500.
Sorry, $1,500. Yes.
Yeah.
Not $15. $1,500 to $5,000, maybe more.
It's like a mini 5G cell tower. I wouldn't call it a femto cell. Maybe it is a femto cell, but it's brilliant because Helium's building the network infrastructure without paying for the network infrastructure.
Exactly, which works really well for IoT because that's honestly the kind of economics you need for like really cheap connectivity. For 5G, here are my issues. One, I don't think the decentralized model will work for 5G because if you're sending a lot of data, you're usually trying to do it in a way that it's usually important data. So I don't see businesses wanting to pay for the 5G network credits, right? Mm-hmm. Now, when I talked to Frank Mong, who is the COO at Nova Labs about this a couple months back, he was like, we're going to provide extra coverage for MVNOs and companies that just need that. And I suppose that you could write that if you're like Dish or small local cell carrier. I can't think of one right off the top of my head. You might write into your TOSs that it's going to be a best effort network in some areas, and then this fits. But for most companies that are buying 5G connectivity, they're going to want guaranteed quality of service. And you can't get that on a decentralized network. So that's my first big kind of issue with this.
I have one, but I'm curious if it's one that you have as well.
Well, the other is it's hard to build high quality networks and good networks. LoRa can be a little ad hoc. It's a long range, it's meshy. To me, it's not a big deal. But if you're building an LTE network, that's network engineering. And there are like entire fleets of people at cell operators that do this and optimize for things like hills and buildings and lakes and federal airspace.
So that's a good point. Both of them are. I have a third concern, and I don't know if Frank mentioned this in your discussion a few months ago, or it's even something that Helium or Nova Labs have addressed. When I use a cellular network, I have some confidence that the data is more secure than on a Wi-Fi network. And I'm going to lose that confidence when I am attached to somebody's local 5G hotspot and then have my data go across their home internet through the backhaul to the real internet, right? How does that work from a security perspective? I don't know.
I don't either. See, that's the quality of service thing too. It's not just, access. It's like security.
Yes.
So I don't know. There's also the issue, this equipment is more expensive, so I'm going to assume that the people who are building it as a commercial entity. It's not necessarily people like you and me. I don't know if I'd spend $5,000 to get in on this.
No, I have no intention of doing that either. I'll admit that I did look just to see the prices, and I'm like, nope, not doing it. But there's one other thing. If I'm going to attach to their network, I presume I've got to have a SIM card in my device to do so.
Yes, and maybe no. So Freedom Fi does sell SIM cards. any SIM card that supports CBRS compatible mobile phones and devices. So you have to be on the right spectrum band, basically, as is the case in all cellular networks. So you have to be on the right spectrum band. And then the operator's core network architecture has to support accessing the Freedom Fi network. Now, if you do just Freedom Fi's, if you're like, I just want to be on their network, then yes, you can buy a SIM card that's only going to work on their network, but your phone has to work with the CBRS compatible mobile stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. I was thinking if I'm a 5G customer today, which I am, and I want to, when I'm in areas where there's not good, say, Verizon coverage or T-Mobile or whomever, and I want to connect to Helium's 5G, do I need a second SIM in my phone? How's the transition work? The handoff? I don't know.
Today, you might need it. Eventually, I'm assuming that would not be necessary.
Right.
I think that's just for people who want to test out and play with this network is the way, looking at the pricing and looking at what they're offering. That's my guess there.
Gotcha.
But it is early days, and I don't know how many devices out there support CBRS right now, because they just did the auction like a year and a half ago.
Yeah. It was not that long ago in terms of telco time.
So that's the deal with Nova Labs buying Freedom Fi. That's kind of how we feel in this. We'll have maybe a few other thoughts towards the end of the show, but yeah, it's a big deal. Well, not for the Helium network, but for Nova Labs, the company that's kind of created the Helium network, and I have a lot of doubts about it. Okay, moving right along. Let's talk about security. This is a whole chunk of security news. First up, good news, bad news. Clarity, which is an OT security provider, has put out it's half semi-annual, biannual. I can never remember semi or bi. Twice a year they do
Twice a year report, yes.
And this is the report for the first half of 2022. And they've discovered a couple kind of things. So in the good news department, in the bad news department, there are more vulnerabilities being discovered. In the good news department, though, when those more vulnerabilities are coming to light that have already been remediated, which means that when they announce these following programmable logic controllers are vulnerable, there's already a patch by the vendors available that companies can install. So that's good.
It's quicker if they're still not patching all of them, but...
No, you still have to, if you're an industrial company, you still have to provide the patch, but 40% of the vulnerabilities disclosed in the first half of 2022 had partially or fully remediated vulnerabilities, which is good. That's up more.
Well, it was 15%, I think, in the last report.
It was 21% for the second half of 2021.
Oh, okay.
In less good news, they're noticing more firmware vulnerabilities, typically software vulnerabilities. That's at the application layer, kind of your applications vulnerabilities there. Those were actually more numerous. And now they're noticing that firmware vulnerabilities are roughly half. So they're kind of evening up there, which is not great because...
No, the software side, it's, I think, I don't want to say easier to fix, but you have more control. If you have the right developers, yes, that all depends on your dev team. And you have access. You kind of control or have input to that software through a vendor and so on. When it comes to the firmware, maybe it can't even be upgraded. It's a problem when you're talking about physical stuff.
Yeah, and it's a problem to patch that stuff. It's much harder to patch that than
Correct.
software. Hey, vulnerabilities are up overall. Yay. And last year, Clarity acquired a company that does medical device security. And so now they're seeing in their data more medical device equipment that's vulnerable. I don't know if that's really as meaningful as one might think because of that acquisition. They're just seeing a whole new stream of data. But I'm just going to throw it out there that, imaging and medical carts are the most commonly attacked devices, apparently in the medical realm. But that's not saying a lot. There's a relatively small population to look from. So don't stress too much. More vulnerabilities are being disclosed. Yay.
That's good.
It is. And when it comes to remediation, the number one way that we're seeing companies remediate or mitigate these problems is segmentation. So that means putting out, creating virtual networks or pretending that it's all air-gapped. That's not true anymore.
Yeah, that kind of seems like a stopgap measure to address the immediate threat, not truly fix it, but I totally understand.
Yeah, they do that because, again, it's so hard to patch. You can't shut down your entire factory like every Tuesday for Patch Tuesday, or your entire hospital. It's just not going to work. So segmentation is the number one way to do it. Secure remote access, that kind of goes in line with segmentation. So basically you're saying, hey, we're going to create an area of the network for highly vulnerable or maybe highly life safety kind of devices. And we're going to make sure that no one but the special people who have MFA, multi-factor authentication, on their access credentials can get to it. So, yay. Okay. I think that's probably enough from this report because it's just not fun. We'll actually be talking more for everyone. Our guest this week is Josh Corman, who is now at Clarity. He just joined this last week, and he's going to be talking about really easy things you can do to level up your security game. Okay. Other flaws. Researchers at the Ben-Gurion University Cybersecurity Research Labs have found a way to hack into air-gapped networks. So if you really think your stuff isn't online, they figured out how to transmit data ultrasonically to smartphone gyroscopes and to send Morse code-like signals to LEDs to network interface cards. So they're basically using physical devices to hack into a network that's not online.
Right. You could be air gapped, but you're not sound or light gapped.
Yes. Now, light gapped, that means you have to physically be able to open up your servers and get access to the NIC, right? So it's a high bar.
I've worked in data centers and I saw lots of flashing LEDs in those racks. They're not all hidden and such, because the point of having them is a status indicator. And if you've covered them up with a rack door, then you can't see the status. It defeats the whole purpose of it. So my guess is it is a pretty legit attack.
All right, fine.
I don't want to agree.
This isn't the status lights on the outside. This is the lights flashing on the NIC card itself.
Which would be in the back typically. Because that's where you plug in. Honestly, it could be in the front just as well. There's plenty of NIC interfaces on the front of these racks. Honestly, this concerns me because I have seen these time and time again in data centers. And if, according to the research, one person was able to steal a 100-bit password in less than a minute with 2 LED colors.
Mm-hmm. The full RSA key in 30 to 60 minutes.
Okay, you'd have to leave like a phone to watch those LEDs for 36 to 60 minutes. And typically that's a no-no in a data center, but it could happen.
Yeah. So these exist. I don't know what to tell you. I'm fascinated by the whole act of using analog and physical, not even devices, just signals
attributes,
to hack into things. But
it's clever.
It is clever. So props to them. It feels kind of CIA or Mr. Robot level stuff, but sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Speaking of things that have already been remediated, Amazon's Ring, it got a patch. Amazon's
It was hacked and
Ring
you didn't even
cameras.
know.
Yeah, it was hacked. You didn't know. So basically, if you had Ring, okay, there's a lot of ifs that need to take place. If you have a Ring camera and you're checking into it on an Android device, you downloaded this malware. So someone would have to convince you to download the malware. Then it could access, the malware would run on your phone, and then hackers could access your Ring camera stream without you knowing.
This is another clever bit because Android uses something called intents. Not like this is super intense, but I have the intent to do something. And it's basically used when you share a web page in Chrome. It reads all the intents, meaning what apps can I share this with? Somebody had put malware in that added an intent for better neighborhoods. And Google's like, oh, that's a valid intent. Okay. And you could use another app to access the camera.
But it's now patched. Don't stress. Yep. All right. So, man, if you're after hearing all that, you're like, I will never bring lights or sound or anything connected into my house.
I'm going
again.
dark.
Yeah. Let me tell you about a company that I wrote about in the newsletter last week called Bluescore. This is a startup, and it was created in 2021, and I like this idea. They call it Pokemon Go for privacy. So this isn't security. This is about your privacy. And what it's doing is it basically, when you come in, there's an app that you'll be able to download on your phone, and it will show you, just like in Pokemon Go, you can scan an area and see if there are any Pokemons to catch.
Augmented reality.
Augmented reality. What did I say?
You didn't say.
Okay, sorry. There we go. Thank you.
You weren't
Kevin.
wrong. You weren't wrong.
So you scan your room and it'll show you these little dots, and those dots will come in colors like red is the worst, blue is the best, and gray is, we don't know. It'll show you all the stuff around you that's trying to communicate with the internet, and it will show you its privacy policies if you click in on it. And I love this idea. I love the idea that I can walk around and understand what devices around me are trying to communicate. And I think it's a very valuable concept. I will link to the story that I wrote. Like, I like the way of making the world where we're adding so much connectivity and data sharing to things, and we don't necessarily understand what could be around us and how it might be communicating back and what it's collecting about us. And with a tool like this, we could do it pretty easily if we wanted to.
That's the key to me, because the privacy terms of service and of every device that you know of, and of course the ones you don't know of, you don't know what their privacy stance is. It takes all that complexity of understanding and distills it down to something very simple and understandable. So I really hope they're successful as a startup, because I love this idea as well. And it sort of gets back to, I don't know if you talked about it on a show or wrote about it. I think you wrote about it, kind of like a Faraday cage or a privacy bubble that we don't have, but it would be nice to have this privacy bubble. And with this, you could see where your safe
Most
bubble
private.
is in a room.
Yeah,
exactly.
True. All right. So exciting. Other startups. Oh my gosh. The folks who created Tinder, or actually one of the folks who created Tinder, has created a smart ring. And if you're like, what? I already have a smart ring.
One?
This one is a smart mood ring. It's called the Happy Ring, and it's going to let you use an EDA sensor to figure out if you're stressed. And we actually talked about this last week with like sticking this sort of apparatus in your earlobe as part of your over-the-counter hearing aid. And here we go with somebody doing it on your hand or finger. And
it's a modern take on the 1970s mood ring.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I don't love about it. I feel like all of these EDA sensors, I feel kind of get into what I call digital snake oil. This idea that they're selling you something based on a biomarker that's relatively unproven from yes, we know that you can measure certain stress responses in the body, but we don't actually know what's caused by it or what just correlates to it. So it feels like there needs to be more research on this.
A perfect example is before the show, because Stacy's Fitbit has an EDA sensor. She's like, oh, I already have this. And she did a 3-minute stress test, which would add to my stress, having to sit still that long. And it didn't tell her anything. It just said, you should reflect on your mood.
Yeah, I think that's Fitbit trying to get me to be mindful. Like, I want to be mindful. I don't. Anyway, so this ring has one other thing we should mention. It's an ongoing trend in the IoT. And that is, it's a subscription only.
Yay. Yeah, you don't buy this ring. You get the ring and commit to a subscription. It's $30 a month. Unless you pay annually, then it's down to $24 a month. You can choose a 2-year plan for $20 a month if you pay in advance 2 years.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the Whoop. I really don't know how many wearable sensor subscriptions we're going to want to have. So
yeah, I say skip that subscription and just do what I do to check my mood. I just call Stacy on Google Meet and she can tell in 2 minutes what my mood is. And it doesn't cost a dime.
I might have to start charging you, Kevin. I demand one story for every time. You're like, oh my God, my mood it's stressing.
You're stressing me out.
Speaking of Kevin's stories, Kevin is bored, y'all. We were discussing, I was trying to see, like, hey, are there any cool devices that we want to review? Anything fun? And he's like,
And actually, you've asked me this a couple times over the past maybe month or two. And I've kind of increasingly gotten about it. And I know I'm going to sound like an old time ranting blogger, but I kind of feel like the smart home has completely gotten boring, at least for me. If you're new to the smart home, I totally get that it's the new and shiny thing and it adds cool, useful features for you. And that's great. I started this in 2010 with Insteon and my own Insteon server. And there are people that have been using X10 devices since the 1970s that they would get at Radio Shack. So I think for people like me and those other people that have been using devices longer than me, everything has just recently gotten so iterative. Like, what's the latest smart bulb? Oh, well, they added this radio. They added this color, this scene. You could say the same thing about just about any quote unquote smart device for the home right now. Very few things have gotten me excited lately because it's just been so iterative. But that also gets to something you've said in the past, Stacey, and I'm coming to see that more and more. That is that the devices, they're not the big story and they can be boring. It's the smart home itself that needs to have the brains and be the robot just needs to be a robot, basically. And there are a lot of interesting things coming up that are in the works, such as Matter.
Or deriving context using like ultra wideband sensors.
Yes, there we go.
Location.
Sensing and context and interpretation with, machine learning at the edge on our devices. The digital assistants aren't doing it for me anymore. I need more intelligence, more predictive intelligence, and more action from my house in advance to predict what I want and just deliver it. That's going to take some learning models. That's going to take time. That's going to take other technology such as, again, sensing with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, UWB, or what have you. So yeah, and I am excited about Matter. It's just we've talked about it now for 3 years and it's just coming. And it is big because it's going to open up the scope of devices people can use because you'll be able to use HomeKit devices on a Google Home platform.
Yeah. And I would say, so for years, the smart home has been device centric, right? Individual devices. And Matter and some of the things we're talking about with context are going to help make it more experience centric. And we just need those things in place to get there because that is the next stage. So instead of us getting excited and reviewing light bulbs, we'll be reviewing basically, it might be services is kind of what I'm calling it, but it might be just like routines or apps that are easily downloadable that you can have. And you're like, oh, this works really well for me. So that's where we're moving to the smart home becoming like a robot or an experience.
A better brain.
There we go. Okay, some quick news bits before we rush off to the IoT Podcast Hotline. Nordic Semiconductor has released its first Wi-Fi chip, and it's going to have Wi-Fi 6 compatibility. Nordic is well known for its Bluetooth chips, and now, poof, adding Wi-Fi. Nordic got its Wi-Fi capabilities when it purchased Insigma. It was the Wi-Fi division of Imagination Technologies. And we've been waiting for this for a while. They've had Bluetooth, cellular IoT, so like LTE-M and NB-IoT chips. They've had Thread. Now they've got Wi-Fi. So really what we're seeing is Nordic Semiconductor coming up and competing pretty head-to-head with one of our sponsors this week, which is Silicon Labs. So go Nordic. All right, next up. Influx Data. They are a time series database company. They are announcing native InfluxDB native collectors. Basically, this is going to let you use MQTT and you're going to just be able to pull your data, your MQTT data stream into Influx DB Cloud, and it's just going to work. That's the idea of their native collectors, is because it's really hard to get your data into a cloud in the manner it's supposed to be in the format. There's a lot of data transformation that sometimes needs to happen. This is going to make that seamless for people. They're going to do it for other protocols, but the first one of these native data collection services is going to be their native MQTT collector. So this is going to be helpful for all of y'all trying to pull in lots of data into your cloud. Okay, moving next, we have Chamberlain. They're no longer going to make their HomeKit hub for the MyQ garage door controllers. But if you have one, it's going to keep working. So that leaves the HomeKit folks with just Meros, yeah?
There's a couple brands that make a similar product to the Meros one, like it's rebranded, rebadged. It's pretty much the same product, though. It's a lot cheaper because the MyQ Homebridge Hub, I think, was $70, and I think my Meros HomeKit garage door opener was under $40.
Yeah. So little tidbit is in the Verge story is the head of this particular product at Chamberlain said that since launching it in 2017, less than 1% of MyQ users were using the Homebridge, the MyQ HomeKit device. So
yeah, they probably went and got a Meros.
Yeah, because Meros is like $40 and this thing is like $70.
Right.
So, and the other thing is, I don't know if garage door openers are part of the access control parts. That is, Matter supports So it's possible they could do it with Matter, but I don't know if it's one of the device types that'll be supported. So
real quick, the MyQ, they had a subscription at one point in time. They added it, and they pulled it, I think?
They pulled it for some devices. I feel like there is a subscription for some services still. I don't use any of those services, but yeah.
Right. So with a non-Chamberlain one, if it's compatible, you don't pay any subscription. I don't pay a subscription fee for my garage door opener.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. So that concludes this segment of the show. But now it is time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, the section of the show where we answer your questions. The IoT Podcast Hotline is brought to you by Silicon Labs and their Works With event. Works With is the go-to developer conference for building the skills needed to create impactful connected devices. And September 13th through 15th, Silicon Labs is bringing together global technology brands, ecosystem partners, and industry experts driving the most exciting advances in the IoT industry. They're going to have keynotes, panel discussions, including one for me, and technical discussions. So learn more at workswith.scilabs.com. All right. Every month on the IoT Podcast Hotline, we offer y'all the ability not only to call in and get answers, but you'll have a chance to win something. And this week's prize is the Hue Sync device system. It's a gateway and then 2 Hue bulbs, and you basically stick it by your TV or your monitor and it's going to sync to the colors on those screens, and it's pretty cool. And to be entered to win, you have to call us before midnight Eastern on August 31st, which is coming up soon. Yeah, we've already got lots of callers. Not that many callers, so you still have a decent chance to win. 512-623-7424. And this week's question comes from John, and it's actually about what we talked about at the beginning of the show. Let's hear it.
Hi, Stacy, Kevin. I am John from San Francisco, and I have a question regarding helium and this new mobile 5G crypto that they're talking about. I was interested in looking at that because, like you, Stacy, I actually earned some money on HNTs, and I'm trying to understand what this new mobile 5G is, because there's a significant investment. It looks like probably a couple $1,000s to get the indoor station and a radio, and I'm not sure what the problem is that it's trying to solve. Would very much appreciate your help. Thanks.
So we did cover a bunch of John's question earlier in the show. We talked about the costs of a 5G helium hotspot. Again, $1,500 to $5,000 if you want to create your own little pocket of 5G to share with the world.
And you're going to have enough backhaul. That's the other thing. Like 5G is not, that can transfer like gigabytes of data. So
yeah,
if you're on a DSL line, not going to work.
I have 1 gig fiber. I think you do as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I could do it.
I could probably do it as well. I don't know that I would want to. As it is, I use about 900 gigabytes of data each month with my ISP. And I actually we didn't talk about this part, so maybe this is interesting to John and others. I don't think my ISP would be very happy that I'm running a 5G hotspot and then sending other people's data, and who knows how much of it, over what I pay for my home internet. And I check my Verizon Fios terms of service, and it's going to vary by your ISP, obviously. There is a clause in there that you can't resell or share your connection for any commercial purposes. And because you're getting tokens for data usage on your own little 5G network, I would say they probably have it covered that you can't do this. But I don't know if they could tell.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, they definitely could tell where your packets are going. They can see that. What I'm curious about is, yes, your backhaul, the terms of service, the quality of your backhaul link, and whether or not Nova Labs is going to put any limits on this. So when Amazon was like, Amazon is doing their Sidewalk network, which is a LoRaWAN network that looks a lot like what the Helium network looks like, except it's based on Echo devices. So your hotspots are actually your Echo devices. Amazon is committed to only using 500 megabytes per month. And I'd like to see something like that from Nova Labs / Freedom Fi for something like this, because otherwise it does feel like it could get out of hand, maybe not quickly, but eventually. And yeah, or you would be using you would sign up for your internet as a commercial provider. I'm assuming this is much more of a business thing. So think of it instead of like individuals like you or me trying to make some money via cryptocurrencies, I feel like it'd be like a replay of like Crown Castle, but individuals operating their own cell phone tower, basically. So maybe it's a decentralized Crown Castle is how I should think about this. And Crown Castle used to be a cell tower network. So
yeah, I would be curious if John or anybody else has decided or does decide to buy one of these and see if they run into any issues with their ISP and what happens to their monthly bandwidth and so on and so forth. I'd be very curious. I don't think I'm going to try it.
Yeah, this isn't something I'm trying. So, okay. Well, John, I hope that plus the earlier discussion helps you. And thank you for giving us a call. And if you would like to give us a call, you can reach us at 512-623-7424, and you will be entered to win. Yay. All right. That concludes this segment of the show. Please stay tuned for our guest, who is Josh Corman, and he is going to be talking to us about bad practices and getting your stuff off search. So kind of the bare minimum for IoT and connected device security. That's coming up after a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Silicon Labs. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Silicon Labs. And I have Ross Sabolcik, who is Senior Vice President of Industrial and Commercial. And today, Ross is going to talk to us about WorksWith, Silicon Labs' virtual IoT conference coming up September 13th through 15th. Welcome, Ross. And I am so excited Silicon Labs is back with the third annual WorksWith conference. Could you share just a little bit about what WorksWith 2022 is going to look like?
Sure. WorksWith has really become the go-to developers conference for the IoT industry. And what's exciting about WorksWith is we're bringing together all the major ecosystems, technology brands, device manufacturers, alliances, designers, and even wireless standards to talk about the future of the IoT. If you look at the conference is free and virtual, so anyone, anywhere in the world can participate. And it's really an exciting time in our industry with lots of important trends. So the emergence of Matter and the upcoming launch of Matter, as well as other standards like YSUN and Sidewalk, those will all be covered at WorksWith. And the agenda is packed with more than 75 technical sessions and workshops, along with several keynotes.
And speaking of keynotes, I understand that you're leading a keynote session on machine learning and the IoT opportunity at the edge. We are super excited about AI at the edge. So can you give us a little teaser of what we can expect to hear in your session?
Yeah, we're excited about IoT at the edge too. And I think, if you look as AI ML has migrated from the cloud down to edge node devices, there's some pretty exciting new applications and use cases that are unlocked by that. So be that keyword detection for a voice assistant or looking at being able to do predictive maintenance in smaller and more cost-effective ways. There's a lot of AI ML applications we'll be talking about. We're going to bring in some guest speakers who'll be sharing their insights as well, including our partner SensiML and Chris Rogers, the CEO of SensiML. And one of our customers, Schneider Electric, and Mac Joshi, who's the Global Director of Strategy, Innovation, and Standards. Beyond the keynote, we'll also have a whole track of technical sessions that are dedicated to AI ML, including learning how to do continuous learning models at the edge, developing voice user interfaces, and adding machine learning to embedded microcontroller applications.
Sweet. All right. So where should listeners go to learn more about WorksWith?
You can check out our website, which is workswith.scilabs.com. There you'll find the complete agenda and be able to sign up for the conference. Again, registration is free, and we really hope that your listeners will be able to join us.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Josh Corman, who has a long list of titles. So I'm going to run through a couple of them. He is a founder of I Am the Cavalry, which is, we'll talk about in a minute. He is also the former chief strategist for the CISA COVID task force. So that's working in the U.S. government. And now he has a new role as the VP of Cyber Safety Strategy at Clarity, which is an OT security firm. That was a whole lot, but before we get into any of it, hello, Josh. How are you today?
I'm great. It's so good to talk to you. I've missed you.
Yeah, I am really excited to have you back. You've been on the show, if not twice, at least once. And I love talking to you. So just to credential people, we're going to be talking about how everybody can do, I'm not even going to call it the bare minimum because you're going to feel sad. Like, oh, I'm only doing the bare minimum. How you can start securing your infrastructure. And this is a big story because we all know that in the US and in other places in the world, our infrastructure is incredibly online and incredibly prone to attack. So before we get to all of this, Josh, talk to me about not your credentials, explain what you're trying to do with I Am the Cavalry and kind of how that through line is getting you to here today.
Sure. I'm a philosopher that ended up in the hacker community, wanted to be a superhero, just didn't have any superpowers and didn't look very good in tights. But over time, as I got more into this, I kept looking for the adults in the room, and I was really worried about the relationship between technology and the human condition. And during the rise of anonymous and hacktivism, I got as high and deep as you can in the US and allied intelligence communities and tried to warn them of my growing concern about overdependence on undependable things and critical infrastructure and public safety, human life. And we found the cavalry isn't coming. No one was going to save us. We said what we needed to say. They understood us, but there wasn't an appetite, political will, infrastructure, education. Things moved slowly, and we knew that bad outcomes would have to manifest before anyone would listen. So through some personal tragedies, I kind of decided if the cavalry isn't coming, what am I willing and able to do? And I challenged the hacker community 9 years ago on August 1st. Said, what are you willing and able to do? And I Am the Cavalry became a personal attestation or a commitment that you were going to be a voice of reason and technical literacy on wherever bits and bytes meet flesh and blood. And we didn't know what we were going to do, but it worked very well. We tried to look at connected vehicles, connected medicine, connected infrastructure, home IoT, but this growing dependence on vulnerable, hackable software and connected software. And we really built trust with different agencies over time, and eventually have had pretty substantive impact, left a boom before harm. And part of the reason we had the focus of our cavalry track this year at B-Sides Las Vegas in Nevada, just before DEF CON, I said, hey, we started off saying to public policymakers and safety critical industries that stuff is flammable, and now stuff is on fire. So how should the mission evolve? Do we declare mission accomplished and go home because now they know it's flammable? Or do we shift into a more operational assist? We didn't have a CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, when we started. They're only 3.5 years old. Now that they exist, how do we load balance and complement? And that was a Socratic question that we are actively answering. But the cavalry was really just trying to be that voice of reason. And we had material impact on FDA guidance, introduced the concept of software bill of materials, or SBOM, going back 9 years, and impacts on most of the regulated safety critical, but it's still too slow. And I guess to tie off my answer here, while I was into my emergency federal service, which I know you're going to ask about, during that same time period, I was working on healthcare and the vaccine supply chains. You saw successful attacks on the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We had successful cyber aggression and disruption on the water you drink, the food you put on your table, the oil and gas pipelines that fuel cars, homes, and supply chains, the schools your kids attend, the municipalities who run your towns and cities, and even timely access to patient care with mortal consequences. So now that stuff is on fire and Main Street knows it's on fire, we're going to need a bigger boat, and we need radically different approaches. So in some ways, we've been saying this for 9 years. In other ways, people are only just now ready to listen.
It is astonishing to me how bad things have to get before people are willing to pay attention to it and then spend money on it. Okay, so I brought you on the show very specifically to talk about the work that you did with CISA, because you've got this mentality of the resource-rich cyber poor. And I want you to explain what that is. And I encourage people listening to be like, oh, hey, wait, maybe I fit into this category.
So target rich and cyber poor is really building off of a beautiful piece of wisdom from Wendy Nather, where she once quipped that many organizations are, quote, living below the security poverty line. And what she was focused on was small, medium businesses that couldn't just do best practices or just do this. And that brilliant piece of wisdom has been used and abused elsewhere. But in the context of my emergency federal service for CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, I had warned Director Krebs as he was recruiting me that 85% of the country's hospitals lack a single qualified security person on staff, so that they would be difficult to reach, and we can't just utter zero trust or best practices at them. In the course of being recruited, the country declared Operation Warp Speed, and while the top vaccine candidate vendors have robust cybersecurity programs, most of their supply chain are also what this target-rich cyber poor. And it became clear to me that we can't just utter platitudes at them. We need fit-for-purpose advice to have empathy, meet them where they are, and identify and buy down risk in the time horizon we have. Because some of these vaccine supply chain vendors, they may be the only one on Earth. And if they're disrupted, that's another couple 100,000 to 1 million extra dead people. So it was impractical to just point at best practices that no one could implement. So this idea of target-rich cyber poor, I guess I'll break it down. You can be poor for a deficiency in one or more of the following three things. You're either insufficient information and awareness, so you just don't know how bad things are or what you need to do. Insufficient incentives. There's not enough carrots and sticks to compel you to do the right thing. And in most cases, it was insufficient resources. They just don't have the talent, budget, or margins to do anything differently within their frame of belief. So meeting them where they are meant if you want to make them safer this week, this month, during the pandemic, when ransom crews might be targeting their vicinity or them specifically, we had to be much more practical and pragmatic about our advice. And we developed a bunch of new tools and frameworks and guidance to do just that, to be pragmatic.
So with that in mind, and the reason I got you on the show is because you actually helped create this program called Stuff Off Search. I could probably do this, and it's that simple and presumably shouldn't take me much time. So do you want to explain the whole idea behind Get Your Stuff Off Search?
Yeah, it's something I've been teaching my students at CMU for a long time. And the concept is your assets are showing on the internet. You should see what your adversaries can see, because many of these attacks are attacks of opportunity, and they're just a mass sweep of the internet to infect anyone that's got these ports open or these vulnerabilities. And while most people know how to use a web browser to find cat pictures, there are tools like Shodan, Census.io, Thingful that can find cyber physical systems or remote administration services and ports that can often give you direct entree into wastewater treatment facilities, hospitals, power plants, and the like. So these are more terrifying to me. And hacking is not even required in a lot of cases, just merely logging in and doing whatever you want, or default passwords that you can Google from the maintenance manuals that are fixed and hard-coded. These things create significant attack surface. And now that attackers are more brazen and willing to assert their will on others, this is becoming quite dangerous.
It's true. I have even used search. I have actually used Shodan to access people's cameras, not like in a mean way, just to see if I could, and didn't look because I'm not evil. But that is something even normal people could use this. So what y'all created was basically just a bunch of guides. And this is like, would you call this like step one? And how does this compare to like hiring something for like network monitoring or intrusion detection?
Well, we knew that most of these targets, and whether they be hospitals or vaccine supply chains, didn't have any security people. So we couldn't rely on expertise. We couldn't rely on budget that they didn't have or procurement cycles. So we said, what can you do for free with very little resource or experience? And it fits alongside another one we should talk about called CISA.gov/bad practices. But let's stay on SOS here for a minute. We call the SOS like sending out an SOS. This is something you can do today, which is enumerate your internet attack surface. And we just tried to make an infographic that could fit on one page. It originally had different clever Easter eggs and kitschy phrases, but governments are risk averse. So the stuff off search was similar to what I used to call Get Your Stuff Off Shodan. But this was a government approved way to self-assess. Ultimately, CISA would prefer people be on their taxpayer-funded cyber hygiene nightly scanning service, which will do vulnerability scans against your internet-facing IP addresses and send you a report. But if you're not on that or haven't signed, the legal agreements, this was a precursor step, and I thought could be a good gateway drug into getting onto a more robust routine vulnerability assessment. But in a lot of cases, especially at hospitals in a hurry, people stood up rogue IT just to enable business to continue with telepresence and telework. And some of those things were unsupported, unpatched, poorly configured. And if you don't know your own internet attack surface, this became a way for you to see what you have, shut off the things you don't need, harden the things you do need, and then get into a routine process of doing this over and over, because your attack surface can change over time. But ultimately, the goal was to get them on the free cyber hygiene scanning for critical infrastructure operators. And because that deluge of findings will be overwhelming, we also encourage CISA to do what they've ultimately done now, which is to publish the KEV list, or the quote known exploited vulnerabilities list. Out of all the CVEs and known vulnerabilities in the world, about 3% ever get exploited. And this is even a subset of those 3 that the US government has noticed are actively and routinely exploited that could endanger critical infrastructure. So if you start to squint, this is a way for free to look at your attack surface and harden it, then maybe get on a scanning service that's also free, but might be overwhelming. And then you can at least double click on patching and prioritizing the most likely to be exploited. And that might get you to the starting line so you can crawl, walk, run. We called this the pragmatic security series if we add in the precursor of bad practices, which we haven't talked about yet.
Well, with that segue, how could I not ask you about the bad practices? Why don't you explain what that's about?
Sure. And again, this is in part because we saw successful and brazen attacks on water, on food, on oil and gas, on healthcare. These things should be off limits, and yet we're tolerating and seeing a lot more attack density on them. So during the Exchange attacks, Microsoft Exchange was being pretty aggressively exploited. We had all these enablement calls with CISA and Microsoft to these sectors. And many of the questions and answers would turn to, well, what about when am I getting a patch for my version? And people were on wildly out of date, end of life, unsupported versions of Exchange. And I had Bob Brutus, at the time, he was the chief data scientist at Rapid7. And I said, hey, can you scan the internet? You always do. And what we found is the number one version of Exchange on the internet is unsupported. So it's not an edge case or a minority. It's the overwhelming majority. And I convinced CISA, instead of merely uttering go do best practices or go implement zero trust, maybe we should talk about bad practices. So we published something called CISA.gov/bad practices. And CISA is not a regulator. It's just, we wanted to put a line in the sand as the nation's risk advisor and risk reducer for critical infrastructure. We wanted to identify some dangerous activity. So the first one was the use of unsupported and end-of-life software in service of critical infrastructure is dangerous. We had a lot of argument about it to say, but isn't this common in critical infrastructure? I said, it is common and dangerous, and we should do something about that. It's time to have uncomfortable conversations, because we enjoyed obscurity and deference from adversaries, but that's all over now. They're here and they're active. So it's time to have difficult conversations with stakeholders, investors, and board of directors to identify and eliminate these bad practices. The goal was that maybe insurers might make it uninsurable or cost prohibitive to insure. Maybe regulators might accelerate regulating these out of existence. There was an ICS sprint after the Colonial Pipeline. And when people are saying, what more can we do? Don't just point them at a NIST cybersecurity framework or best practices, but also the standard you walk past is the standard you endorse. The second one at the time was the use of hard-coded, fixed, and unchangeable maintenance passwords. And then later we added a third one of single-factor remote administration tools that are too powerful from the outside. And in a lot of these target-rich cyberpoor, these 3 things alone are why it's so easy for any accident or adversary to possibly disrupt the food supply or water or healthcare.
I ask a lot of people this when we talk about this, because I agree with you. There's a lot of old gear. I just throw it on their old gear. Maybe it's no longer supported. Maybe it has hard-coded passwords. People are still using it. Do we need some sort of program? I know the FCC did a program to help WISPs get rid of Huawei equipment when they decided it was no longer secure. So do we need some sort of grant program to help companies get rid of some of this old equipment? Because it's really hard to tell somebody who's barely, making a profit, they've got to upgrade all of their camera network that just works fine for them, right? So what is the way to get this fixed?
Well, I'm a big believer that you don't mess with Maslow's base of the pyramid, right? We're enlightened apes at times, but when we have any insecurity for our family, for our safety, for our shelter, we're Lord of the Flies pretty quickly. So we are playing fast and loose with water and food and shelter and safety, and can't. So the public sector, the government, is supposed to provide security and public good on these topics. In this country, we have delegated that government responsibility to private owners and operators in a lot of places, and the economics are broken. in a lot of these sectors, and they don't have the money. So we have to have empathy for them. But the first step is acknowledging you have a problem. So the bad practices were to acknowledge that this is dangerous. They have no idea how they're going to get rid of it. And I think on a sector specific basis, on a technology specific basis, we should prioritize what to fix and when. One idea we had during my congressional task force for healthcare back in 2016 and 2017 was a cash for clunkers program, a one-time buyback program to upgrade wildly dangerous things. I was hoping on the Exchange example for the unsupported software that perhaps we could convene at the White House and say, hey, all these hospitals or wastewater treatment on unsupported Exchange, could we have a one-time program to subsidize and migrate to either G Suite or Office 365 or something that is easier to maintain, more modern and more secure? Does everyone need to run their own technology stack? Maybe in some of these cases, you won't eliminate risk, but you can dramatically reduce operational variance. I don't think it's going to be a single program for everybody. There is a bill in the House right now being circulated to do raise the minimum hygiene standards for hospitals, but also to give a grant-making authority specifically targeting small, medium, and rural hospitals who are further below that cyber poverty line that Wendy talks about. So I hope we can at least, I think first and foremost, I want to remind people that I love my privacy. I'd like to be alive to enjoy it. And it's not just your credit cards or data that's replaceable, but we have irreplaceable trust and public safety, human life at the bottom of Maslow's too. Even though there's public-private partnerships, most of those public-private partnerships, and the ISACs and sector leadership really represent the haves, not the have-nots. And this target-rich cyber poor program and the pragmatic security suite that we started is not meant to be the end. It's meant to be the beginning of trying to cater to the underserved cyber poor, which is the majority. And then third, we wanted to nudge the private sector to say, you might not think there's much money in these target-rich cyber poor, but there's a long tail, right? It's when I was a product manager, it's price times quantity, right? You either have a high price, low quantity, or low price, high quantity. I believe there are untapped markets eventually if you innovate and try to help people with less security talent and more constraints with a higher public safety impact for the public good. And in parallel with that, the cavalry thing I started 9 years ago, that was the focus of our 2-day track this year was, can we start to write free tools or gateway open source projects that might be a hurdle for drive-by attacks? Can we maybe isolate these older systems? When 9/11 happened, the metaphor I'll use quickly, we did a lot of bad things, including going to war for 20 years and violating civil liberties. But one smart thing we did is, instead of scrapping the entire fleet of commercial airlines, legacy tech, so to speak, we added steel reinforced cockpit doors. Similarly, I don't think we're going to snap our fingers and get rid of all these bad practices, although I do think this is becoming a de facto standard of negligence, which we've been sorely lacking. But I think as that matriculates, there may be hard but important conversations about how do we at least make sure that if a hospital's ransomed, the time-sensitive services for heart and stroke patients can maybe still function. Can we harden the things that are the most time-sensitive and latency-sensitive? And there'll be similar questions the EPA will have to ask for water and wastewater, or Department of Energy for their remit, oil and gas under TSA and other patchwork of federal partners. We have been too cavalier and accepted unacceptable things and over-dependent on undependable things. And in the meantime, maybe the safest thing to do is disconnect a bit. Like, if you can't afford to protect it, you can't afford to connect it. Maybe with great connectivity comes great responsibility. And if you don't have enough wherewithal or team to digest actionable threat intelligence, if it doesn't have to be connected, perhaps abstain or mitigate some of the risk by being less connected on systems that can't afford the consequence of failure.
We are tending to advocate here on the show, if you don't have to connect it, don't. Can you do this with edge-powered algorithms? All of that. So I'm with you there. Okay. For people who are like, oh, this sounds doable, I feel encouraged. That's how you should feel. CISA.gov/bad practices gets you to the basic bad practices that you should try to avoid and dump stuff that has it. And then CISA.gov/publication/stuff-off-search gets you to how to search Shodan, Thingful, and Census for your stuff that might inadvertently be online. You could spend like an afternoon doing this. It would be fun and probably disconcerting. So, Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show this week. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stacyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening, and please subscribe.